I think sometimes we come into these rooms. I know when I first got in there, it's been 15, 16 years ago now when I first learned about this world and I came into it. And I remember going and hearing all these people talking about stuff and they're sharing numbers and stats. And I think I had this envision in my head that like I was going to come in and like 5 days later I was going to be a cajillionaire and that was going to be how it worked because all these other people were doing it. And I think a lot of people have that belief as well. And sometimes they come in, they start working and doing the process, and if they don't get it right away, they fall away from it, which is frustrating and it's hard. And so I want to kind of just talk about my journey for a little bit because every time I meet somebody, I always get people who are like, I've known you ever since the beginning. I'm like, oh yeah, when was that? And they're like, yeah, back when you did the .com secrets book, ever since the very beginning. And I was like, there was 10 years that I was doing this before the .com secrets book came out. Or like, yeah, all the way back to micro-continuity. Who here remembers micro-continuity? Yes! I was like, yeah, I was 6 years in when that came out. So I've been doing this for a long time. There's been a whole bunch of ups and downs. And one of the quotes that is in the new Traffic Secrets book, this is actually the .com secrets book. We just taped the cover. Anyway. Oh, we totally did, yeah. I had someone grab it and like, I took pictures of it inside and I was like, yeah, it's literally expert secrets. So yeah, anyway. But in the Traffic Secrets book, as I was writing it and researching and just trying to figure out the right stuff, there was a quote, and actually from an entrepreneur who lives here in Boise. Anyone here ever heard of ConvertKit? Yeah. ConvertKit. So Nathan Barry's the founder of ConvertKit. He's the local Boisean as well. A really cool guy, someone I have a ton of respect for. It's part of an email he wrote, and the subject line was, endure long enough to get noticed. And he said, how many great TV shows have you discovered in season 3 or later? So I started watching Game of Thrones after they'd released 5 seasons. Pat Flynn had released over at least 100 episodes of his podcast before I even knew it existed. I discovered hardcore history years after Dan Carlin started producing it. This is such a common experience. There's so much content being produced that we can't possibly discover it all. So instead, we wait for the best content to float to the surface after time. If step 1 in building an audience is to create great content, then step 2 is to endure long enough to get noticed. Seth Godin is very generous with his time and will appear on almost any relevant podcast, but you have to have recorded at least 100 episodes first. His filter is creators who have shown they are willing to show up consistently for a long time. And so when I read that, I was just like, man, it's crazy. And I was talking to my wife about this the other day because it's still like this whole thing is insanely weird to us. Because like this started 15, 16 years ago when we first got married, and I'm sitting there and I'm like learning about all this nerdy marketing stuff and funnels, and we didn't even call them funnels back then, but I was learning about stuff and direct response marketing and reading books about headlines and hooks and like all these things. I was geeking out and I would try to like talk to people about it. Like I talked to my friends and my family and my parents and my brothers and everyone, like trying to explain it to them. And you're like, this for me like the most exciting thing in the world. I'd explain it to them, I'd go through and they look at me like, oh, that sounds really nice. I mean, you guys have friends or family when you guys start talking about this stuff, they're just like, oh, do you not understand what I'm talking about? Like, oh, and I freak out. I'm like, this guy did this and this person did this. I'm telling story after story after story of all these people, all the people that I saw on other stages telling their story. I tell their stories. And they're like, oh, that's really nice. I'm like, how are you nice at getting this? Like, how are you missing the energy behind this? Like, what am I doing wrong to convey this? And I would talk about it over and over and over again, and nobody seemed to care. But I cared. It was so exciting for me. And so after I started talking louder, and eventually I had a couple kids, I was still going to Boise State down the road. I had a couple kids in my classes who started listening, and they're like, that's really cool. And I tell them about them, and they got excited. I tell other people, and so many people never heard me, right? I was speaking, but they never heard me. I kept speaking, and eventually a couple people started hearing, and a couple more started hearing. But it was slow, and the first decade of me doing this, like the groups were not ever big. In fact, the last event I did before Funnel Hacking Live, which was probably about 10 years ago, so I'm probably 7 or 8 years in, I did an event, and we had, I think, 300 people-ish signed up for it, and I was super excited. We did it down in Salt Lake. Me and our tiny team, we drove down there, we showed up, and less than 100 actually showed up after they bought tickets. And I'm in this room just like, God, like, how is this so hard? Like, this is the most exciting thing in the world to me, and I can't get people excited. But I kept talking because I was passionate about it. Okay, if I would have done this because I thought other people can get passionate about it, it would have withered up on the vine a long time ago. How many of you guys here create some kind of content? Almost everyone. Who doesn't? You should be. Someday you will.